The robbery didn't make the news. No one screamed. No alarms went off. No shots were fired. At the time, no one realized what had happened until the store manager rewound the footage 3 days later, searching for something entirely different. It was just past 9 in the morning on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday. The kind of day where time moves slowly, where the world seems half asleep. Miller's Corner Store sat on the intersection of 5th and Main, a small convenience store that had been serving the neighborhood for over 30 years. The morning rush had already passed, leaving behind the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the gentle buzz of refrigerated units. Sarah Chen had been working the morning shift for 6 months now, saving up for college. She knew the regulars by name, their usual purchases, their small talk patterns. Mrs. Rodriguez always bought her coffee black and complained about the weather. Tommy from the auto shop across the street came in every Tuesday for energy drinks and lottery tickets. The mailman, Pete, stopped by around 10:30 for his daily banana and bottle of water. But this Tuesday felt different somehow. Sarah couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way the light filtered through the windows, casting longer shadows than usual. Maybe it was the unusual silence of the street outside. Or maybe it was just one of those days when your instincts whisper that something is coming. The first man walked in at 9:07. Sarah glanced up from her inventory clipboard, offering her practiced smile. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a gray beard that had seen better days and a worn-out denim jacket that spoke of years of hard work. His eyes were sharp, alert, taking in every detail of the store with the kind of awareness that comes from a lifetime of watching. He didn't head straight for any particular section. Instead, he walked the aisles slowly, methodically. His weathered hands touched nothing, but his eyes cataloged everything. The placement of the security camera, the distance between the counter and the door, the blind spots created by the tall shelving units. Sarah watched him peripherally, not alarmed exactly, but curious. Some customers browsed. This man was doing something else entirely. Minutes passed. The man continued his slow circuit of the store, never picking up a single item. Sarah began to feel a strange tension building in her chest. There was something about his presence that made her more aware of her surroundings, more alert to the sounds of the street outside, the weight of the silence inside. At 9:15, the bell above the door chimed again. A younger man entered, perhaps in his early 20s. His hoodie was pulled up despite the mild weather, casting his face in shadow. Where the older man moved with deliberate calm, this one moved with nervous energy. His eyes darted quickly around the store, not browsing but scanning, calculating. Sarah's training kicked in. She'd been taught to watch for certain behaviors. Customers who avoided eye contact, who seemed more interested in the store's layout than its merchandise, who appeared agitated or nervous without obvious cause. This young man checked every box. He made his way toward the counter, his right hand fidgeting with something beneath his sweatshirt. Sarah's mouth went dry. Her heart began to beat faster, that ancient fight-or-flight response flooding her system with adrenaline. Her hand, as if moving of its own accord, began to drift toward the panic button hidden beneath the counter. The store suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder. Time stretched like taffy, each second feeling like an eternity. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the young man's nervous energy radiating across the small space between them. And then, In that exact moment of maximum tension, something extraordinary happened. The older man stopped moving. Not gradually, not with a pause or hesitation. He simply stopped as if someone had pressed a pause button on his existence. His body became perfectly still, perfectly balanced. But his eyes, those sharp, alert eyes, locked on to the young man approaching the counter. There was no movement, no gesture, no sound, just presence. Just the weight of his attention focused with laser intensity on the would-be thief. The young man felt it before he saw it. That peculiar sensation of being watched, of being seen, of being known. He turned his head, expecting to see another customer, perhaps someone he'd need to wait for or work around. Instead, he found himself looking into eyes that had seen too much, that had faced down dangers he couldn't imagine, that held a lifetime of experience distilled into a single, unwavering stare. Something fundamental shifted in that moment. The young man's breath caught in his throat. His nervous energy transformed into something else entirely. Something that felt like fear, but deeper, more primal. It was the recognition of a predator by prey, the acknowledgement of a force far greater than himself. His hand, which had been reaching for whatever weapon he'd concealed beneath his sweatshirt, began to tremble. Not with excitement or adrenaline, but with the dawning realization that he was completely outmatched. The older man hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even changed his expression. But somehow, without any visible threat, he had communicated a simple message. I see you. I know what you're planning, and I won't let it happen. The young man's fingers twitched, then slowly, almost involuntarily, moved away from his concealed weapon. His breathing became shallow, rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the store's air conditioning. Every instinct screamed at him to abandon his plan, to get out, to run. The stare continued, not angry, not threatening in any conventional sense, just absolutely certain. The older man's eyes held the kind of confidence that comes from facing down real danger, from making life and death decisions, from knowing exactly what he was capable of when pushed. The young man tried to hold the stare, tried to maintain his resolve, but he was drowning in those eyes, sinking beneath the weight of their certainty. His hand lowered completely, his body language shifting from predatory to defeated. He took a step backward, then another. The spell of his original plan was broken, shattered by nothing more than the presence of a man who had simply chosen to pay attention. Without a word, without any drama or confrontation, the young man turned around and walked straight out the door. The bell chimed his departure, a sound that seemed to break the tension like a soap bubble popping. Sarah stood behind the counter, her hand still hovering over the panic button she'd never needed to press. She looked at the older man, who had resumed his slow walk through the aisles as if nothing had happened. Her mind struggled to process what she'd witnessed. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice shakier than she'd expected. "Sir, what just happened?" The older man turned to her, and she saw in his eyes a gentleness that hadn't been there moments before. "Nothing happened," he said simply. "Just a young man who changed his mind about something." But Sarah knew better. She'd felt the electricity in the air, the moment when violence had been a heartbeat away, and then the sudden deflation when it evaporated. She'd witnessed something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The older man bought a newspaper and a cup of coffee, paid with exact change, and wished her a good day. He walked out the same door the young man had used, But his exit felt completely different. Where the young man had fled, this man simply left. For the next 3 days, Sarah found herself replaying the incident in her mind. She told her manager about it, but struggled to explain what had actually happened. "He was going to rob us," she said. "I'm sure of it. But then this other customer just looked at him, and he left." Her manager, Jim Miller, whose family had owned the store for 3 decades, was skeptical. "Maybe he was just browsing and decided not to buy anything," he suggested. "Maybe you misread the situation." But Sarah knew what she'd seen. The problem was, she couldn't prove it. There was no crime to report, no theft to document. Just a feeling, a certainty that something significant had been prevented. It was Jim who finally thought to check the security footage. He'd been looking for evidence of some missing inventory, trying to figure out when and how several items had gone missing. He scrolled through hours of mundane footage, customers coming and going, Sarah restocking shelves, the usual rhythm of a small business. And then he found it. Tuesday morning, 9:07 through 9:23. He watched the older man enter, begin his methodical survey of the store. He watched the younger man arrive, his body language clearly agitated, his intent obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Jim leaned closer to the screen, his eyes widening as he watched the scene unfold. The young man's approach to the counter, his hand moving beneath his sweatshirt. Sarah's obvious distress, her hand moving toward the panic button. And then, the moment that changed everything. The older man's sudden stillness, the weight of his attention, the young man's visible transformation from predator to prey, the slow retreat, the hasty exit. Jim paused the footage, studying the older man's face. Something about him looked familiar, but he couldn't place it. He called Sarah over to watch the replay. "See?" she said, vindicated. "I told you something happened." Jim nodded slowly. "You're right. That young man was definitely planning something. But who is this other guy? Why does he look familiar?" They watched the footage several more times, trying to understand the dynamics of what they'd witnessed. The older man's presence was undeniable, but it was something more than simple intimidation. There was an authority there, a certainty that went beyond physical threat. It was Jim's father, Frank Miller, who provided the answer. At 83, Frank had been part of the neighborhood for most of his life. He'd seen it change, watched families grow up, witnessed the ebb and flow of generations. When Jim described the incident and showed him the footage, Frank's eyes lit up with recognition. "That's Officer Delaney," he said without hesitation. "Retired now, but he walked this beat for 30 years. I'd know that face anywhere." Jim looked at the paused video screen, studying the older man's features. "A cop? The best kind," Frank continued. "He saved my life in '89. There was a robbery here, actually. 3 kids with guns hopped up on something. I was behind the counter, scared out of my mind. Delaney walked in during the middle of it, just like any other customer. Didn't even have his weapon drawn. Just looked at those kids and said, 'Gentlemen, you're making a mistake.' Something about the way he said it, the way he carried himself. They just put their guns down and walked out." The pieces clicked into place. "He did it again," Jim breathed. "Same thing, 35 years later." Frank nodded. "Some people have that gift. They don't need to raise their voice or show force. They just are. And sometimes that's enough." The security footage made its way onto social media, as things do in the modern world. Someone leaked it, and within hours it had been shared thousands of times. But this wasn't the usual viral video of violence or confrontation. This was something different, something that resonated with people in a way that surprised everyone. The comments poured in from around the world. This is what real strength looks like. No violence, just presence. We need more people like this in the world. This is how real heroes act. News outlets picked up the story. The local paper ran a front-page feature about Officer Delaney, retired but still serving his community simply by being present, by paying attention, by caring enough to act when action was needed. A reporter managed to track down the retired officer, found him at his small house 3 blocks from the store. He was tending to his garden, still moving with that same deliberate calm that had defused a potential robbery without a single word of threat. "I don't know what all the fuss is about," Delaney told the reporter, his weathered hands never pausing in their work among the tomato plants. "I was just buying my morning paper." Kid looked like he was about to make a big mistake. Sometimes people just need to be reminded that they're not alone, that someone's paying attention. The reporter pressed for more details, but Delaney just shrugged. 30 years on the force teaches you a lot about people. Most folks aren't really bad. They're just lost, or scared, or desperate. Sometimes a little presence, a little attention, can help them find their way back to who they really are. Sarah watched the interview on the evening news, finally understanding what she'd witnessed. It wasn't about intimidation or force. It was about someone who had spent his life learning to read people, to understand the moment when someone was about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. And in that moment, he'd chosen to be present, to be aware, to care enough to act. The young man from the hoodie was never identified, never caught, never prosecuted, because no crime had been committed. Instead, a crime had been prevented, not through violence or the threat of violence, but through the simple power of human connection, of one person seeing another clearly and choosing to intervene. The video continued to spread, viewed by millions around the world. It became a symbol of something people had been searching for without knowing it. The idea that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect. That sometimes the most powerful action is the quietest one. That presence can be more effective than force, and attention more powerful than weapons. Officer Delaney returned to his quiet retirement, still taking his morning walks through the neighborhood, still stopping by Miller's Corner Store for his newspaper and coffee. But now, people knew him, recognized him, nodded with respect when they passed him on the street. And Sarah Chen, who had started that Tuesday morning expecting nothing more than another routine shift, found herself forever changed by witnessing the moment when one man's presence prevented another man's fall. She went on to study criminal justice, inspired by the idea that there were ways to serve and protect that went beyond traditional law enforcement. The store never was robbed. The young man never returned. And somewhere in the city, a potential victim became a success story, though he would never know it. He had been seen in the moment when he needed it most by someone who understood that sometimes the most important battle is the one that prevents all the others. The robbery didn't make the news, but the prevention of it did. And in a world that often seems to reward the loudest voices and the most dramatic gestures, it reminded everyone that sometimes the most profound actions happen in silence, in the space between heartbeats, In the moment when someone chooses to see and to care. Some heroes don't need sirens. They don't need uniforms or weapons or grand gestures. They just need to be present, to pay attention, to understand that every moment is an opportunity to choose between adding to the world's problems or being part of its solutions. They need nothing more than the courage to stand still, to look directly at what others might prefer to ignore, and to communicate through their very presence that today, right now, in this moment, someone is watching, someone cares. Someone won't let you make that mistake, not today.